Excited to be here with you guys. As Jack said, I've been with Satoshi Pacioli, which is the first ever Bitcoin native accounting firm. We support a lot of Bitcoin companies and some nonprofits as well, do their accounting, do tax work for them. I am not an accountant, though. I am actually, I think the way you'd want to think of it is more of a management consultant. And I am doing internal management consulting for the team itself as we continue to grow and improve our operations and improve our strategy. Uh, and then I also am working with a few other Bitcoin companies as well, doing the same with them and learning a lot from that process. So today I want to talk with you guys about, I titled this talk Building Beyond the Bear. It's not sponsored by Build a Bear. There's no confusion there in case anyone was wondering. Managing from first principles, right? Because we as Bitcoiners, I think we would all agree there's something special about Bitcoin. We've all been drawn to it for certain principles and certain key elements in Bitcoin that have given us hope, that have given us a new view of money, that have helped us understand how banking and the monetary system works, whatever it is, right? But we've all come to Bitcoin through many of the principles of Bitcoin, and they're very important, very dear to us, and it's part of what makes us as Bitcoiners unique, and I have a unique identity in the things that we believe. So uh, I want to start off this presentation and thinking about this idea of managing from principles and being Bitcoiners running Bitcoin companies, especially in a bear market. What do you guys think is the biggest challenge that every company faces? I'm asking that as a rhetorical question, but I would imagine that you might start to think if you see this question, you start to think about it. You're probably going to think something like, well, we need more revenue, right? We need to grow revenue. Or maybe we need to improve profit margins. Or maybe we need to acquire more customers. Or maybe we need better investment pitches to get capital, right? So like these kind of very specific problems are probably coming to your mind, right? Would you guys agree? Am I on track here? Maybe there's employee retention problems. Maybe there's an employee culture problems, right? Maybe there is resource allocation problems, right? There's many different problems that we could say is the biggest challenge that every company faces, right? But I want to think really deeply or really try to hone in on what is truly the biggest challenge that every company faces, regardless of if they're a Bitcoin company, okay? Not just Bitcoin companies, all companies, every single company that's ever existed, including the ones that are Bitcoin companies. And the answer, I think, is a very simple answer, but it's very profound, and that's time. So what do I mean by this? Do you guys recognize any of these? Any of them? Right? Now, I think we all would agree that at one point, all of these companies were major players in their industry, or maybe the major player in their industry, right? Nobody knew about photography unless you had a Kodak, right? Like a Kodak camera was how you took pictures. So Kodak became almost synonymous with this idea of like capturing memories, right? Um, you think about Blockbuster, right? So if you ever wanted to watch a movie that you didn't own, what did you do? You got in the car, you drove 20 minutes to the nearest Blockbuster, you got the VHS or the DVD off the rack, you borrowed it, you held it for 4 days, you paid the late fee when you returned it a week later, right? That was how you experienced movies that you didn't own if you didn't watch it in the theater. Uh, and it was the only way. I mean, pretty much, you had your knockoff family video brand or whatever, but like you went to Blockbuster if you wanted to borrow a movie. Um, but as we all know, and you can look at all of these businesses and many, many more, either they are no longer in existence, like they literally do not exist, or they're pretty irrelevant. They're not players in the market anymore. Nobody looks at them as leaders. Nobody looks at them as, like BlackBerry, for example, they're still in business, but they're not at the height that they were during the mobile BlackBerry, the mobile BlackBerry craze back when Apple introduced the iPhone. So we see these companies rising and falling. And it's not just the big companies. 50% of startups fail within their first 5 years, right? So that's half of all startups in 5 years, right? So that's not even that long of it. Like literally, that's just half a decade. 50% of the startups that are starting today, they're not gonna be around in 5 years, right? So staying in the game, time is a huge challenge. And it's not just companies, it's nations. And as Bitcoiners, we know it's also currencies. They don't even last this time, at least fiat currencies. Every single one has failed up till now. So going back to this, what is the biggest challenge that every company faces? I think it's staying in the game. It's being able to outlast and live through time, whereas many other businesses are going to fail. And you can trace every single problem that I mentioned before to this idea. We need to increase revenues. Why? Because we're going to need to fund more operations, fund more growth. We need to acquire more customers. Why? Because we need to be able to expand our operations, expand our business. We need to improve profit margins. Why? Like all of this is about staying in the game. You get better at doing these things, you stay in the game longer and you stay in the game of business longer. And if you don't get better at doing these things, or if you get stagnant, then you're not going to be able to stay in the game. And I'm borrowing this a little bit from the author Simon Sinek. Has anyone read Simon Sinek's Infinite Game or heard of this concept? A few of you guys have? Okay. So Simon Sinek articulated this concept of finite games versus infinite games in his book, The Infinite Game. And he says that infinite games have infinite time horizons. In an infinite game, the primary objective is to keep playing, to perpetuate the game. And the unique observation that Sinek has here is that business is not a finite game. And what do we mean by finite games, first of all? What even is a finite game? Well, take a football game, for example. Football is a finite game. And what do I mean by this? Well, at the end of the game, there's a winner who has more points than the loser, right? So the team that wins, that walks off the field with more points, they win the game. The team that loses, they didn't get as many points. The game ends, but the players don't. The players keep going. The players outlast the game, right? There's known rules in a finite game. So you can't show up on a football field and all of a sudden a touchdown is worth 10 points where last week it was worth 6 and then the week before it was worth 3. It's worth 6 every single time, right? Pending the extra point. So there's known rules in a finite game, rules that don't change, or at least they don't change arbitrarily. If they do change, it's a long review process and everyone knows about them before the next season, right? But when the game starts, the rules don't change in the game. They stay the same. And like I said, the game ends, the players don't, the players outlast the game. And there's no new entrants and exits into the game. There's no random entrants and exits into the game. So for example, we know that if the Tennessee Titans are slated to play against the Baltimore Ravens on a certain day at a certain time at a certain stadium, the Tennessee Titans and Baltimore Ravens will show up at that time at that stadium and play the game. We don't randomly see the Green Bay Packers showing up and playing at that game. We don't randomly see the New York Yankees showing up at that game. Like we don't randomly see a whole bunch of new entrants and exits. We see the same two teams that were scheduled to play that game show up and play that game. So that's a finite game. Business is not a finite game, as Sinek's point. It's an infinite game. So you can take all those concepts and you can almost invert them. The game outlasts the players. Players don't outlast the game. There's no end to the game of business where we say, this business has scored this many points and this business has scored this many points. This business is the winner. This business is the loser. It's over, right? The game of business keeps perpetuating. The rules change constantly. And these can be formal rules and they can be informal rules, right? These can be rules such as obviously laws, right? Laws change all the time. Tax policy could change, a regulation could change, right? But those rules change all the time. So because rules change all the time, you have to, and you don't know them, you don't anticipate them. There are always new entrants and exits into an industry or into the business world, and you don't see them coming, right? Blockbuster did not see Netflix coming, but Netflix still showed up and played the game. You see how that's different from the finite game, right? So when you understand this mental model of infinite games, and you understand, therefore, that the goal is to stay in the game, it's not to win over a particular time period. It's not to win the next quarter. It's not to win the next month. It's not to win the next year, but it's to stay in the game and keep creating value for a long time, for decades to come. Then the question that I ask, and I want you guys to consider coming out of this talk, is what is your management framework that keeps you in the game? And maybe you haven't even thought about that. Maybe you don't have like a specific management framework that you've thought about, and that's okay. But I want you to start thinking about it. what is your management framework that's going to keep you in the game of business, not just tomorrow, not just next week, not just next month, but for years and years to come? And how are you going to use that framework to help your team succeed and help your team be a part of that game for the long run? So if this is true, if you guys agree with everything I'm saying so far, if it makes sense, then businesses need, especially Bitcoin businesses, we need a principled management framework and corresponding mental models that helps our businesses stay in the game so that we don't become the next business that becomes another logo on the screen and we all chuckle about and move on from, right? We want to stay in the game. We want to be relevant and we want to be creating value for our customers for a very long time to come. So if that's true, we need a management framework that enables us to do that. Does anyone know who this is? This guy on the screen? So this is the economist Friedrich Hayek. He won the Nobel Prize for Economics in the 1970s. And actually, he won the Nobel Prize for his contribution specifically on business cycle theory. So he helped us understand, why booms and busts happen in the economy. Hayek had a lot of contributions to help us understand that. But that's neither here nor there. This is a quote from Hayek that I think illustrates one of the principles that so powerfully aligns with what we believe as Bitcoiners. The possibility of men living together in peace and to their mutual advantage without having to agree on common concrete aims and bound only by abstract rules of conduct was perhaps the greatest discovery mankind ever made. And there's a little bit of what Hayek's talking about here that he's alluding to Adam Smith's idea of the invisible hand in the market and allowing market forces to emerge as ways to regulate resource allocation. Um, Contrast this with what Satoshi Nakamoto wrote in the white paper. We have proposed a system for electronic transactions without relying on trust. It's the same concept that Hayek is talking about here in a very specific context, but it's the same concept. The idea of Bitcoin as being a system for electronic transactions without relying on trust, according to Hayek, is the greatest discovery mankind ever made. It's the same exact idea of us working together to mutual advantage without having to agree on common aims. We just have a decentralized network that works for us. Key principles of Bitcoin. Now, this is not exhaustive. I don't intend for this to be exhaustive, but these are things that I think we all would agree, or at least some of these are very strong principles that we hold to as Bitcoiners, and it's something that maybe Bitcoin has helped us understand more. Principles like truth, decentralization, low time preference, free markets, emergent order, individual sovereignty, property rights, equal rules for all, and sound money. Again, not saying that this covers every single principle that we would talk about when we talk about Bitcoin, but it covers a lot of good ones. And it covers principles that I think many of us would say, yeah, that's something that even was part of why I was attracted to Bitcoin in the first place. So if we have these principles of Bitcoin, can we grow a business with a proven management framework that aligns with these principles and helps us operationalize them in a business context, in the day-to-day, right? In the execution of the operations of the business, in the acquisition of new customers, in all those problems that we talked about earlier? Do we have or can we have a framework that's grounded in those principles that helps us stay in the game? And the answer is yes. And for to understand this better, I'm going to direct you guys to a quick case study of Koch Industries and their management framework, principle-based management. So Koch Industries is based out of Wichita, Kansas, and they were founded by Fred Koch, actually. Fred Koch was the founder of Koch Industries, but his son, Charles Koch, became CEO in the 1960s. And Koch Industries, and now currently Charles Koch and Dave Robertson are co-CEOs. It's the second largest private company in the United States behind Cargill. It has over 130,000 employees worldwide, and I think this number is a little low now, but I think this is a 2024 number. They did $115 billion in annual revenue. Again, that's billion with a B. So it's not it's not an insignificant amount of money. It's actually quite a lot of money in their annual revenue. I think now they're pushing like somewhere in the 120s or even 130s. They are in many industries, including petroleum, chemicals, fertilizers, consumer products, polymers and fibers, logistics and transportation. Every single one of you in here has used a Coke product at some point in your life, whether you realize it or not. One of the most common examples is if you ever used a paper towel dispenser in like a public restroom that has the GP logo on it. That's GP is a Coke subsidiary company, right? So they do a lot of consumer products like that, products that that you don't necessarily. It doesn't say the Coke brand, but they are owned by Koch Industries. Now, the key differentiating factor in Koch Industries, or the reason for their success, according to Charles Koch himself, is the principle-based management business philosophy. So let's dive into this a little bit more. So, according to the PBM website, principle based management is a framework based on the principles of human progress that enables individuals and organizations to succeed long term by creating superior value for others. And from Charles Koch's book, Good Profit, principle based management is based on this idea of allowing people the freedom to pursue their own interests within the limits of just conduct. It's the best way and only sustainable way to achieve societal progress. As Charles Koch, Charles Koch, digested this and went about my business, it dawned on me that these principles are fundamental to the well-being not only of societies, but also of organizations, which are essentially small societies. So to give you an understanding of what happened here, Charles Koch became CEO of Koch Industries in the 1960s, and at that time, what was the major geopolitical thing going on in the 1960s? Well, yes, that was a major issue, but what was like the major international issue? Vietnam was part of it, but it's the Cold War, right? Soviet Union. We got the Soviet Union and we got the United States in a Cold War. And one of the observations that Charles Koch had was, why is a nation that is so rich in natural resources, that has such a long and storied history, why are they so poor and why are they struggling versus the United States, which is a relatively young and up and coming country? Why are we so successful relative to them, especially in terms of economic prosperity and freedom? And his fundamental observation as he studied this at the society level, what was happening in terms of economics, in terms of political theory, he's like, wait a second, we believe that people can be free to bring their best selves to their life and to make their own decisions and to have sovereignty over their own lives. We believe in free speech. We believe in property rights. The Soviet Union doesn't. And that's part of why we believe in market forces. So that's why our country is running better than their country is. But why are so many businesses running according to a top-down, very more Soviet hierarchical style structure? What if we had a business framework that was grounded in these principles of free speech, free markets, property, and we actualize that into a management framework? And thus, actually, market-based management was formed. Now it's called principle-based management, but at the time it's called market-based management. So again, the core ideas, if first principles grounded in individual empowerment, Austrian economics, free speech, and equal rules improve society at large. And these are some of the thinkers that Koch relied upon, such as Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, the two economists up here, kind of middle left of the screen. Also Abraham Maslow on the far left, Milton Friedman on the far right. If these thinkers have given us some great ideas about how to help and understand why society works, then we can also use them to improve businesses. Now, just to give you an idea, this is just for comparison. This blue line represents the growth of the S&P 500 during the same time period as Koch Industries. So the S&P 500, as we know, has grown quite a bit. It's grown quite a bit during that time. But as you can see, Koch Industries has significantly outperformed the S&P 500. And Koch would attribute this to the principle-based management framework that they've developed over the last 60 years that are grounded in these principles. Now, principle-based management has 5 dimensions, and these 5 dimensions are all grounded in the principles that we just talked about. And they're meant to help a business and an organization understand what problems do we have in our business and how can we optimize and how can we improve. And so basically the thesis is, if I look at my vision and I take each of these dimensions and I kind of assess the business from the lens of that dimension or through the mental models associated with that dimension, I can figure out where the gaps are. I can figure out where the problems are that are preventing me from creating long-term value for my customers and staying in the game. So in practice, this would look something like this, right? I'm going to actually go to this slide. Let's say in your business, you have a very simple problem. This is a simple problem that almost any business, especially any business that ever does sales ever, they're going to run into this problem at some point. We routinely lose track of quality leads with poor follow-up. Now, there's many things that there's many angles you might look at that without a framework in place. The Koch framework would say, sounds like we might have a knowledge problem. We have some knowledge gaps. Where are those knowledge gaps? Why is this information not getting shared? What knowledge processes do we need to put in place so that we maintain track of those leads and we improve our follow-up? So it helps us diagnose problems a lot quicker because now we go, okay, this sounds like a knowledge problem. Let's put our thinking caps on and let's try to figure out the knowledge gaps. Another problem that's very common across pretty much any organization is I keep telling my team what the priorities are. I keep telling them what to do, but the work they're putting out doesn't reflect those priorities. Maybe there's a shared vision problem. Maybe you have an view of the vision as a leader, but your team has a different view of that vision, and you haven't figured out how to communicate and get the buy-in for that shared vision that's going to reflect in the priorities that you want them to address. But again, we understand this because we have this framework in place, and we understand that this framework gives us the diagnostic tools to understand this. What if your team's not showing up motivated? They're not stepping up to take responsibility. There's a whole dimension in PBM about motivation. Why do people show up to work? How do we keep high performers performing at a high level? How do we get people who are not performing at a high level to perform at a high level? What do people find meaningful in work? That whole dimension addresses any questions you've got around lack of motivation or why people are not stepping up in the workplace. Everyone does what needs to be done. This is a common problem, especially in startups, which many Bitcoin businesses are. We're in startup mode. Everyone is wearing a bunch of different hats. So everyone just kind of jumps to it and gets to work. Well, you actually may have a comparative advantage problem because you may have people performing at certain tasks that yeah, they can do it, but they're giving up a lot by spending time working on those tasks. That if you reallocated decision rights and responsibilities a little bit more, you could actually achieve a much better comparative advantage that would improve your output. I'm not sure if my recent hires align with our company values. Has anyone ever been in a situation like this? Maybe you're not the hiring manager, but maybe a teammate was hired and you're like, oh, I'm not sure. You might have a virtue and talents problem. So this is a very high level example of how this would work. And obviously, these are very specific types of problems. There's many problems that can happen in a company, but this is how you would look at it. You'd look at a problem and you'd say, huh, sounds like it might be A. And then you'd look at it through that dimension. And you might be wrong. Maybe there's another dimension that actually explains it better. But at least now you have the diagnostic framework to take a deeper dive. So I believe in my background, I worked for Stand Together. It was a nonprofit, Charles Koch's nonprofit, for about 6 years. So my background is in principle-based management, even before it was in Bitcoin. I believe that principle-based management and Bitcoin companies are a perfect match for the reason that they both are grounded in low time preference. Right? Bitcoin is grounded in low time preference. That's one of the reasons we love it compared to the short-term consumptive fiat mindset. Right? We love the virtue of the low time preference as Bitcoiners. The underlying foundation of principle-based management is the underlying question that they're trying to answer is how do we create value for the long term for our customers? How do we stay in the game creating superior value 10 years from now, not just tomorrow? It allows for individual autonomy and creativity. In fact, it encourages it, right? As Bitcoiners, that's one of the reasons we love Bitcoin. We're tired of the fiat system not suppressing that, and Bitcoin gives us an opportunity to do that. Well, this principle-based management framework does the same. Long-term value creation, which I've talked about, is the foundation of the framework. It provides a competitive edge in a modern and rapidly evolving economy, right? Creative destruction is happening all around us on a day-to-day basis. If you think about especially a lot of the advances that are happening with AI, PBM accepts creative destruction as a reality and then tries to be a driver of creative destruction rather than a recipient of it or a victim of it. So All that being said, uh, I think it's important for as Bitcoiners, as we continue to build our companies, to uh, look to something like the principle-based management framework and to say, hey, we have these principles that are grounded in what we believe as Bitcoiners, but we're also trying to run a business day to day. How do we take these principles and translate them into an actionable framework that we can use to run a business and grow a business for the long term? As Saifedean said in the Bitcoin Standard, the most important economic decisions to any individual's well-being are the ones they conduct in their trade-offs with their future self. And I think this is not just true for individuals. I think it's true for companies. And that I think the principle based management framework gives us one of the best examples of what this can look like when we actually take these principles that seem a little bit abstract on the front end and convert them into something that's actualized and operationalized within our businesses. So that's a lot of the stuff that I work on at Satoshi Pacioli. It's also I'm working on with several other companies as well. And yeah, wanted to give you guys an opportunity to ask any questions you got. Happy to field any questions on what we talked about here and hear from you. So, and that's a wrap. So thank you guys.